Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are opening a file that I think for most people brings up a really instinctual reaction, even if they don't know all the specifics. We are heading into the dark, windswept territory of Saddleworth Moor. We are talking about the Moors murders.
It's a heavy one. It really is.
Yeah.
And you're so right about that instinctual reaction. This isn't just a true crime story. It's arguably the moment the British psyche fundamentally changed in the 20th century.
Changed how?
It shattered a specific kind of post-war innocence. The idea that kids could play out in the street until dark and be safe. That idea, it died on those moors.
I want to start with the landscape itself because in all the source material, it feels like the moor is a character in this story.
It absolutely is.
It's not just a dumping ground. It feels like an accomplice.
That's the perfect word for it.
Right.
Saddleworth Moor, which is just outside Manchester, is this vast, peat-covered, desolate place. It's beautiful, in a very stark, rugged way. But it's silent.
And that's what they needed.
That's what they relied on. The two people we're discussing today, Brady and Myra Hindley, they weaponized that silence, that emptiness. It's this wild place right on the edge of the industrial sprawl of Manchester, a place where secrets can be buried. And the peat, it preserves things in a very eerie way.
We have a lot of source material here, investigative files, biographies, trial transcripts. But our mission for this deep dive isn't just to list a timeline of events. Anyone can look up a date on Wikipedia.
Right.
We need to try and understand the mechanism of this partnership. How do two individuals lock into a psychological spiral that leads to the abduction and murder of 5 children and teenagers?
That is the absolute core question. Is what psychologists call folie à deux, a madness of two.
A shared madness.
A shared psychosis. And the sources all suggest that neither of them, on their own, might have committed these specific atrocities. It required a truly toxic chemical reaction between Brady's existing sadism and Hindley's, her capacity for compliance. It's all about how their individual pathologies interlocked and amplified each other.
We are going to get into some of the nuggets from the files that really just stand out. The secret tape recording that silenced an entire courtroom, a lost glove used as a lure, and a forensic breakthrough that involved a pet dog.
And the suitcase. Don't forget the suitcase.
The suitcase left at the train station that broke the whole case wide open. But we have to start with the people. Let's look at Brady first. The sources really paint a picture of someone who was, for lack of a better term, born wrong. Is that a fair assessment, or is that just hindsight bias?
I think it's a bit of both, but the red flags with Brady were incredibly distinct from a very early age. He was born Ian Duncan Stewart in the Gorbals area of Glasgow, January 2nd, 1938.
And the Gorbals in the 30s was a tough place.
One of the toughest slums in Europe. And context here is absolutely key. He was illegitimate. He never knew his father. In 1930s Scotland, that carried a huge social stigma. His mother, a waitress named Peggy, had basically no support. So she had to give him up, essentially, to foster parents, the Sloanes, when he was just a few months old.
Which is a rough start for any kid, for sure. But plenty of children in the 30s and 40s were in foster care or came from broken homes. They didn't all grow up to, read the Marquis de Sade and murder children.
Exactly. That's the trap of trying to find a single cause. Environmental factors matter, but they are not predictive on their own. The difference with Brady was the early onset of this profound cruelty. We're not talking about a kid pulling wings off flies.
No.
We are talking about serious allegations that at age 10, he burned a cat alive. He was reported to have stoned dogs, to have cut the heads off rabbits. Now, later in life, Brady denied some of these specific instances, but the pattern of behavior, this complete lack of empathy for suffering creatures, it was noted by everyone around him.
And that's the classic triad of sociopathy, right? Animal cruelty is often step one. It's like practicing on something helpless before you graduate to people.
It is. It's a rehearsal. And when you combine that with a high intelligence that he used purely for manipulation, well, you have a problem. He was an above-average student at Shawlands Academy, but he was bored, he was resentful, he quickly turned to housebreaking, theft, smuggling lead seals from the docks.
Which is how he ended up in the Borstal system.
Right. And for our listeners, maybe younger ones or those outside the UK, can you clarify what Borstal actually was in this context? It sounds so Dickensian.
It was essentially a youth detention center, but in 1950s Britain, it was an incredibly hard environment. The philosophy was to break rebellious spirits through hard labor and very strict discipline.
And did it work on Brady?
The opposite. He went to some of the toughest units, Hull and Hatfield. Instead of breaking him, it calcified him. It hardened him. He learned to be quieter, more cunning, more secretive. He learned how to manipulate authority rather than just fighting it head on.
So it was just a training ground for him.
In a way, yes. It's where this intellectual pretension really kicks in, which I found so disturbing in the notes. After Borstal, he moves to Manchester to live with his mother and her new husband, Patrick Brady. That's where he gets the name. But he's not trying to reintegrate into society. He's building a philosophy to justify his hatred of it.
He's building a justification for what he wants to do.
Exactly. He taught himself German specifically so he could read Mein Kampf in the original text.
Wow.
He was obsessed with Nazi atrocities. And this is key. It wasn't out of historical interest, it was out of admiration. He admired the scale, the efficiency of the cruelty. He was reading the Marquis de Sade, exploring this philosophy of absolute power over other living things. He began to see himself as a superior man.
A Nietzschean Superman.
Yes, someone above the petty morality of the sheep all around him. He saw everyone else as insects.
And on the outside, he was just, what, a clerk at a brewery?
A stock clerk at a chemical firm, Millward's, living this completely mundane life. But in his head, he was a misunderstood genius, a predator walking among prey. His colleagues described him as having this calm, undisguised arrogance. He was punctual, quiet, but just seething with this dark superiority complex.
Okay, so that's Brady, a loaded gun waiting for someone to pull the trigger.
Right. And then you have Myra Hindley. And this is where the debate has always raged. Was she a monster in her own right, or was she made into one? Because her background looks, well, surprisingly normal compared to his.
On the surface, yes, it does. She was born in 1942 in Gorton, Manchester. Working class. She had a job as a typist. She had friends. She was even engaged to be married at one point. But when you scratch the surface, you find these cracks. Her father, Bob, was an alcoholic and by all accounts, extremely violent.
There's that story about her father teaching her to fight. It feels like such a pivotal moment in her development.
It's a crucial anecdote, I think. She was 8 years old. A boy in the neighborhood scratched her face during a playground scuffle. She came home crying, expecting comfort from her dad.
And she didn't get it.
She got the opposite. He didn't comfort her. He threatened to leather her, to beat her, if she didn't go back out there and retaliate. So she did. She went out, found the boy, and punched him until he fell down.
That teaches a child a very specific, and I'd say very dangerous lesson about how the world works.
It does. It teaches you that violence is the only way to avoid punishment. If you are weak, you get hurt, not just by your enemies, but by your own protector.
You have to align yourself with the source of power to be safe.
Precisely. It normalizes aggression as a survival tactic. Then you add to that the trauma she experienced as a teenager. Her close friend, a boy named Michael Higgins, drowned in a local reservoir.
And she blamed herself, right?
Deeply. He had invited her to go with him that day, but she went somewhere else instead. She carried this immense survivor's guilt over it.
That kind of guilt can make a person incredibly vulnerable, looking for answers, for some kind of structure.
And she was. She converted to Catholicism after his death, taking the confirmation name Veronica. She was searching for redemption or for rules or just for someone to tell her how to live. She even broke off her engagement because she said the man was too immature. She wanted someone strong.
And unfortunately, the strong person she found was Ian Brady.
They met at Millward's Merchandising in 1961. She was a typist, he was a clerk. And if you look at her diary entries from the source material, it was an immediate obsessive infatuation.
What was it about him? He was quiet, arrogant, not exactly Prince Charming.
She was fascinated by him because he was aloof. He ignored her for months. He barely acknowledged her existence.
Which, for someone with her background, that need to please the dominant male to prove her worth, that probably felt like a challenge she had to conquer.
It was the hook. It was irresistible. She wrote about him constantly in her diary. She dressed up for work every day, hoping he'd notice. When he finally asked her to the cinema in December 1961, it wasn't a date in the romantic sense we'd think of. It was the beginning of an indoctrination.
This part of the timeline reads like a cult recruitment of one person. It is so systematic.
It's brainwashing, plain and simple. Brady systematically dismantled her entire worldview. Their dates were watching X-rated films and drinking German wine. He introduced her to his library, Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, all the Nazi literature. He'd play recordings of Hitler's speeches.
And he went after her faith.
He attacked it directly. He convinced her that God was a myth, that her Catholic faith was just a crutch for the weak. He systematically replaced her morality with his nihilistic, power-obsessed philosophy.
There's that quote she gave later that really stuck with me. She said she would have believed the moon was made of green cheese if Ian Brady had told her so.
And that, right there, is the definition of the folie à deux. She completely subsumed her identity into his. She wasn't Myra Hindley anymore. She was an extension of Ian Brady.
The physical transformation is part of that, too.
A huge part. She dyed her hair peroxide blonde, wore bright crimson lipstick, leather jackets, high boots. She was dressing herself as the Aryan ideal that he fetishized. They created this hermetically sealed world where the only approval that mattered was his. She cut off her friends. She became distant from her family. She was living entirely in Brady's orbit.
And they weren't just reading books and playing dress-up. They were preparing for something. The outline mentions they joined a rifle club.
They were arming themselves. Hindley joined a rifle club to learn to shoot. She eventually managed to buy 2 handguns privately, a Webley .45 revolver and a Smith & Wesson .38. They were taking explicit photographs of each other, constantly testing boundaries. And then Brady started talking openly about committing the perfect murder.
This concept of the perfect murder, it wasn't just some idle fantasy. He was referencing historical cases, wasn't he?
He was obsessed with Leopold and Lode.
The 2 wealthy American students in the 1920s.
Exactly. Who killed a boy just to see if they could get away with it, to prove their intellectual superiority. Brady saw murder in the same way. He called it an existential exercise.
An existential exercise. That phrase is just chilling. It implies they wanted to kill not for passion, not for money, not for revenge, but just to prove they could. To prove they were superior to the law, to society, to life itself.
To prove they were the superior beings they'd read about in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Brady identified with the character Raskolnikov, the idea that extraordinary men have a right to commit crimes. And in July of 1963, they stopped theorizing and they started acting.
Which brings us to the murders themselves, and I want to focus on the method because this is where the partnership becomes so lethally effective. A lone man on a moor is suspicious. A couple asking for help, not so much.
Exactly. Their apparent normality was their primary weapon. Their first victim was Pauline Reade. She was 16 years old.
And she knew Myra Hindley.
She was a neighbor of Hindley's sister. She knew Myra by sight, trusted her. And this is where they first deployed the lost glove ruse.
Can you walk us through that? It sounds so simple, almost childish. Why was it so effective?
Because it weaponizes a child's natural inclination to be helpful and polite. Hindley would be the one to approach the victim, usually in her van. She'd pull up and say she'd lost an expensive glove on the moor and was worried her mother would be angry. Could they please help her find it?
It's not a threat. It's a request for assistance from a woman.
It disarms every defense. Who would ever suspect a woman asking for help finding a glove? It's the perfect lure.
So they get Pauline to the moor. Brady is waiting nearby on his motorcycle.
Yes. They lead her out into the emptiness, and Pauline was murdered and buried there. Now, the sources diverge here on the specifics of the act. Hindley always claimed she waited in the van while Brady committed the murder.
And Brady claimed she was a full participant.
He did. But regardless of who held the knife, she drove the van. She was the lure. She helped choose the burial spot. She was all in.
And then, just a few months later, they do it again. John Kilbride, 12 years old. November 1963.
The same method, essentially.
Yeah.
Lured from a market in Ashton-under-Lyne, it was getting dark, cold. They offered him a lift home, maybe some sherry to warm him up, and then the lost glove story again.
But there's a detail in the Kilbride case that shows the absolute depth of their depravity, something they did afterwards.
The photograph.
A photograph.
After they had buried John Kilbride, Brady took a photograph of Myra Hindley standing over the fresh grave.
I've seen it described. She's sort of crouching, looking down at the ground, and her little dog, Puppet, is in the shot with her.
To any stranger looking at that photo, it's completely innocuous. It's just a snapshot of a woman out walking her dog on the hills.
But to them,
it was a trophy, a memento to relive the thrill, the power. It shows a complete and utter detachment from the reality of what they had just done. They were literally posing for a souvenir on top of a child they had just murdered.
Then, after Kilbride, there's this gap. The sources mention a cooling-off period before the next murders. Now, that seems unusual for serial killers, doesn't it? I thought the urge usually accelerated.
It is an anomaly. Usually the high wears off faster and faster, and the killer needs to strike again more quickly, which often leads to a frenzy. But they waited nearly 7 months before they took Keith Bennett in June 1964, and then another 6 months before Lesley Ann Downey.
So why the pause? Were they getting scared? Losing their nerve?
The evidence suggests the opposite. They were confident. Arrogant, even. They seem to have been distracted by other criminal ambitions.
What kind of ambitions?
They were planning armed robberies.
Seriously?
They were accumulating more weapons, studying armored car routes, planning bank heists. Brady seemed to be pivoting to armed robbery as another way to prove his superiority over society.
So the murders weren't an uncontrollable compulsion.
It reinforces that they were in complete control, which almost makes it scarier. It wasn't an impulse they couldn't stop. It was an activity they scheduled when it suited them.
We have to talk about Keith Bennett. June 1964.
Keith was 12 years old. He was on his way to his grandmother's house, just a short walk. Hindley pulled up in her Mini and asked him if he'd help her move some boxes into the car.
And he was a helpful boy.
A kind, helpful boy. So of course he agreed. They drove him to the moor. Brady walked off with him, again using some version of the glove story. Sometime later, Brady returned to the car alone, carrying the spade.
And Keith Bennett's body has never been found. We'll definitely touch on the aftermath of that later, but the fact that he is still out there on that moor it's one of the most haunting aspects of this entire case.
It is a wound that is never closed. But let's move to Boxing Day, 1964, the day they murdered 10-year-old Lesley Ann Downey. This is where the case gets even darker, if that's even possible.
Because they didn't take her straight to the moor.
No. They took her from a fun fair and brought her back to their house,
Yeah.
16 Wardle Brook Avenue. And this is where their use of technology comes in. They recorded her ordeal on a reel-to-reel tape recorder.
This was a deliberate act. They wanted a souvenir of their own depravity.
They wanted to be able to replay it, to replay the power they held over that child, to relive her terror. We'll discuss the tape's role in the trial later, but the sheer coldness of wanting an audio record of that. It speaks again to that trophy hunting mindset. It's beyond comprehension for most people.
Usually these kinds of murder partnerships, they implode. One person cracks under the pressure, or they get sloppy, or they're caught by the police. But in this case, the downfall came because they got arrogant. They tried to recruit a third member.
Exactly. Enter David Smith. Smith was Hindley's brother-in-law. He was just 17, and he was married to her younger sister, Maureen.
And Brady saw him as a protege.
He did. He saw a bit of his younger self in Smith's rebellious, angry anti-authority. Brady wanted to groom him, just like he'd groomed Hindley.
But Smith didn't know the full extent of what was going on, did he?
Not at all. Smith was a bit dazzled by Brady's attitude. He liked the talk of easy money and bank robberies. He liked the feeling of being let in on a secret criminal world. But he thought it was all talk. He had no idea about the murders. Not until October of 1965.
When Brady decided it was time for a demonstration.
Brady wanted to blood Smith. That was the term. He wanted to make him an accomplice to a murder so that he couldn't go to the police.
And this is the murder of Edward Evans. Unlike the others, this wasn't a clean disappearance on the moor. This was messy. It was chaotic.
It was a slaughter in a suburban living room. Brady lured Edward Evans, a 17-year-old apprentice engineer he met at a train station, back to the house. Then he sent Hindley to go and fetch David Smith.
He brought him to the house.
Brought him to the house and told him to wait outside for a signal, a flashing light from the window.
It's so theatrical, so cinematic in his mind.
It's Brady living out his movie villain fantasy. Smith sees the signal, he goes inside. Brady leaves him in the kitchen, says he's just going to get some wine. And then Smith hears screams.
He runs in.
He runs into the living room, and he sees Brady attacking Edward Evans with a hatchet.
That must have been just a shattering moment for Smith. He thinks he's there for a drink or to talk about a robbery, and suddenly there's an axe murder happening in front of him.
He described hearing this terrible, hard blow of the weapon. He watched Brady then strangle the boy with a piece of electrical cord to finish the job. And Hindley, she wasn't cowering in the corner.
No, she was participating.
She was shouting instructions, handing Brady the ligature. She was an active participant. Smith was frozen with terror. He was convinced he was next.
So he played along.
He had to. He helped them wrap the body in plastic sheeting because he was sure that if he showed any hesitation, any disgust, he would be on the floor right beside Evans.
But here's the crucial error Brady made. In the struggle, he hurt himself.
Yes. During the fight with Evans, Brady badly injured his ankle. He was essentially incapacitated. He couldn't easily move the body by himself, and more importantly, he couldn't chase anyone.
So Smith plays along, helps clean up, and gets out of the house. He runs home to his wife, Maureen. And this is the moment where the folie à deux fails to expand into a folie à trois.
Exactly right. Smith gets home, he's violently ill from the shock, and he tells Maureen everything. And they make a decision that saves, well, Who knows how many future lives? At 6:10 in the morning, David Smith goes to a public phone box to call the police.
And the detail of how he went to that phone box is so telling of the fear he felt.
He armed himself. He took a screwdriver and a bread knife with him. He was absolutely convinced that Brady was coming for him and his family. He was ready to fight for his life.
The arrest itself has this bizarre, almost mundane quality to it. You expect a SWAT team kicking down the door, but it was much more subtle.
There were no SWAT teams in 1965 Manchester. The officer in charge, Superintendent Bob Talbot, he realized that if they just knocked on the door, Brady might destroy evidence or even start a siege.
So he came up with a plan.
A very clever one. Talbot disguised himself as a bread delivery man. He put a white coat on over his police uniform to get Hindley to open the front door.
That is proper old-school policing. Bread delivery.
And it worked perfectly. Hindley opened the door. Talbot identified himself and his team pushed in. They found Brady in bed, nursing his injured ankle and writing a note to his employer to explain why he wouldn't be at work that day.
The banality of evil right there. There is a body wrapped in plastic in the spare bedroom, and he's writing a sick note for his stock clerk job.
The police asked for the key to the locked spare bedroom. Hindley stalled. She claimed the key was at her workplace. Brady, maybe realizing the game was up, or maybe just in too much pain to argue, told her to give them the key.
And they opened the door.
They opened the door, and there was the body of Edward Evans.
And Brady immediately tries to talk his way out of it. His first words are something like, "Eddie and I had a row and it got out of hand."
He's already trying to frame it as a fight between friends that went too far. Manslaughter, perhaps. Not murder. But the police were smart. They started searching the house meticulously. And the real breakthrough, the thing that blew this case wide open, was a prayer book.
A prayer book, of all things.
Inside a prayer book they found in the house, tucked away, was a small slip of paper. It was a claim ticket for the left luggage office at Manchester Central train station.
For listeners who might not know, left luggage is basically a locker or storage area at a train station where you can leave bags.
Precisamente. And in those bags, a pair of suitcases, was a treasure trove of self-incrimination. Brady had stored his most damning possessions there for safekeeping. They found the guns. They found a collection of pornographic photos. They found the 16-minute tape of Lesley Ann Downey's final hours. And they found photos.
Photos of the Moors.
Dozens of photos of the Moors. And they also found an exercise book with the name John Kilbride written in it.
And that was the link.
That was the moment everything changed. Suddenly, this wasn't just a domestic murder of Edward Evans. The police connected the name in the book to the missing boy. And then they looked at the photographs of the moors, these bleak landscapes, close-ups of the ground. And they realized they weren't looking at holiday snaps. They were looking at a graveyard.
I want to highlight the forensic work here regarding those dog photos.
Yeah.
They had pictures of Hindley's dog, Puppet, on the moor. How did that specifically help them find the bodies?
It was a brilliant piece of deduction. They suspected the photos showed the grave sites. But to know which missing child case to connect them to, they needed to date the photos.
And there were no timestamps back then.
No. So they looked at the dog, Puppet. They brought in a forensic veterinarian to examine the dog's teeth to determine its age in the photographs versus its age now. They were trying to build a timeline based on the dog's growth.
And this leads to the only time during the entire investigation that Myra Hindley showed any genuine emotion.
The dog, Puppet, sadly died under the anesthetic during the dental examination. When Hindley was told, she went ballistic. She screamed at the police. She accused them of being murderers. She wrote to her mother, quote, "I feel as though my heart's been torn to pieces."
That creates such a terrifying paradox, doesn't it? She can listen to a 10-year-old girl pleading for her mother on a tape and feel absolutely nothing. She can call her own attitude brusque, but the dog dies and she's heartbroken.
It completely demolishes any defense that she was just a scared victim of Brady who was numb to everything. She clearly had empathy. She was capable of love and grief. She just chose not to extend it to human children. She reserved it for her dog. It implies a conscious dehumanization of her victims, which is chilling.
So using the photos as a map, they go back to the moors, they start trying to identify the locations.
And they found Lesley Ann Downey's body relatively quickly. She was identified by the clothing found with her. A few days later, they found John Kilbride. The Moors were finally giving up their secrets.
Let's move to the trial. April 1966 at Chester Assizes. The atmosphere around that courthouse must have been incredibly volatile.
It was dangerous. The public rage was unlike anything seen in Britain before. Mobs attacked the prison van, bringing them to and from court every day. They had to install bulletproof glass in the dock.
A first in British legal history.
Yes. because there was a genuine fear that someone in the public gallery would try to shoot them during the proceedings.
And the moment that defined that trial, the moment that I think seared this case into the public memory forever, was when they played the tape.
The prosecution made the decision that the jury needed to hear the reality of what happened to Lesley Ann Downey, not just read about it, but hear it. So they played the 16-minute audio tape in open court.
And the reaction?
The sources say that grown men, hardened police officers and journalists were openly weeping. 2 women in the gallery physically covered their ears and had to be helped out of the courtroom. It was just pure, distilled suffering.
And what was the reaction from Brady and Hindley in the dock?
Brady was, by all accounts, indifferent. He sat there taking notes, acting bored, as if it was all beneath him. Hindley, however, was forced to confront it. On the stand, she was asked about her voice on the tape, about her tone with the child. She described her attitude as brusque.
Brusque? What a sterile, bureaucratic, inhuman word to describe that kind of cruelty.
It was her attempt to minimize, to sound detached and professional. But it didn't work. The jury saw right through it. They found them both guilty on all counts. They were sentenced to life imprisonment.
And we have to note a crucial historical detail here. The timing of this trial is staggering.
The death penalty for murder had been abolished in the UK just 6 months prior, in November of 1965.
That is incredible. They missed the hangman's noose by a matter of months.
If the murder of Edward Evans had happened a year earlier and they'd been caught then, they would almost certainly have been executed. Instead, the judge, Justice Fenton Atkinson, sentenced them to life, calling them 2 sadistic killers of the utmost depravity and recommending they never be released.
Now, usually for most cases, the story ends when the cell door slams shut. But the Moores murders had this long, toxic tale. They kept secrets for decades.
They did. They denied the murders of Pauline Reade and Keith Bennett for 20 years. For 2 decades, they held that information hostage, leaving those families in a state of agonizing limbo.
And their lives in prison were quite something.
Brady went into the high-security psychiatric system, eventually ending up at Ashworth Hospital. He leaned into the villain role. He wrote a book called The Gates of Janus, where he analyzed other serial killers. He went on hunger strikes for years, being force-fed through a tube, claiming he wanted to die, but clearly enjoying the battle of wills with the authorities.
And Hindley tried to rebrand herself completely.
She did. She claimed to be a reformed, devout Catholic. She argued that she was just another one of Brady's victims, that she had been brainwashed and was now redeemed.
And she had some high-profile supporters, didn't she?
She did, most notably Lord Longford, a prison reformer who genuinely believed she was a changed woman. He visited her. He campaigned tirelessly for her parole. He was branded a loony and a fool by the press for it. But the public never, ever forgave her. That police mugshot of her, the peroxide blonde hair, the hard, cold stare, it became the icon of feminine evil in Britain.
But in the late 1980s, the secrets finally started to come out. Why then? What changed?
Desperation, mainly. By the mid-'80s, Hindley realized she was never getting out unless she showed total and complete cooperation. She thought that if she finally confessed everything, it might clear the slate and help her chances for parole.
So she talked.
In 1987, she officially confessed to her role in the murders of Pauline Reade and Keith Bennett, and that led to this surreal, macabre operation where the police took both of them, separately, back to Saddleworth Moor.
Imagine that scene. It's 1987. There are helicopters overhead, police cordons for miles, media from all over the world, and these 2 killers are walking the landscape again, trying to remember where they buried children 2 decades earlier.
It was a spectacle. And it worked, in part. Based on Hindley's memory of the landscape, she remembered a specific view of the rocks from one of the burial sites. They finally found Pauline Reade's body in 1987.
But not Keith Bennett.
No. And that is the open wound that remains in this case. Despite massive, repeated searches over the decades, despite Brady playing cruel mind games with Keith's mother, Winnie Johnson, sending her cryptic letters and maps that led nowhere, Keith Bennett was never found.
Winnie Johnson spent her entire life campaigning, searching the Moors herself, begging them to tell her where her son was.
She died in 2012, never knowing, never being able to give her son a proper burial.
That is a level of cruelty that's almost separate from the murder itself. It's a continuous, decades-long act of torture against a family. Brady died in 2017, Hindley in 2002. The case is technically closed, but it feels so unresolved.
It feels unresolved because the landscape still holds a secret. And the cultural impact is permanent. It truly did end that age of innocence.
Yeah.
Before this case, there was a general belief that children could play out on the street until dark. After Brady and Hindley, parents in Britain and really across the world started to look over their shoulder. The rules changed.
It also introduced the idea that a woman could be just as dangerous, just as much of a predator as a man.
Yes, it shattered that stereotype completely, which brings us back to that central, disturbing question of the folie à deux. When you look at the totality of the evidence, what is the final takeaway about human nature here?
It's terrifying, isn't it? The realization that evil isn't always something that just is. Sometimes it's something that is unlocked. Would Myra Hindley have lived a normal, unremarkable life if she had never met Ian Brady?
It's possible. She might have been a clerk, gotten married, had children, and that darkness inside her would have just stayed dormant. You found the key.
So the final thought is, how many other people are walking around just one wrong meeting away from becoming monsters?
That's the question that this case leaves you with. And it's a deeply disturbing one.
A very disturbing thought to end on. The idea that the moor is quiet now, but it still remembers everything.
It does. It stands as a monument to what happens when two dark psychologies meet. And instead of canceling each other out, they amplify each other into something hellish.
We've covered a lot of dark ground today. Thank you for guiding us through the psychology and the history of this case.
Thank you. It's a difficult one, but an important one to understand.
And to our listeners, take care of yourselves. We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.